Staff, welcome. I'm calling to order the Planning Commission meeting for today, December 17th, 5 o'clock. Kaylee, roll call, please.
Okay. Chair Claren?
Here.
Vice Chair Gove? Here. Commissioner Freeman?
Here.
Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Here.
Commissioner Taylor?
Here.
Can we all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? How about if Carrie Too Tall Tabor leads us? Nation. Thank you. All right, this is the time of public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the commission on items which are not on the agenda tonight. If you have a public comment, please state your name for the record. Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Number 7 on the agenda, public hearings, major review, 7.1, application 2024-23, Martyrs Valley Quarry, 2-year review and project amendment. Staff presentation, Sean Tall.
Thanks, Chair Claren. Tonight I am here with Martyrs Valley Quarry 2-year review. This is item 7.1 and application 2423. So the Martyrs Valley Quarry is an open pit aggregate mine. It also includes an asphalt plant where AC or asphalt concrete is produced, often used for state and local road repair and maintenance. Aggregate is a broad category of coarse, medium grain particulate material such as sand, gravel, crushed stone. The project is located on Jorger Drive, adjacent to TTSA's wastewater facility. You can see here is the mining parcel. This is Glenshire. We've got the Truckee River and Legacy Trail traveling here north of the site. A close-up shows you some of the areas that are in the reclamation process. That means that the mining area is being reclaimed with natural grasses and vegetation. You can see where the rock plant, some active mining, and the asphalt plant are located on the site. So a little history. Nevada County approved a use permit for the open pit mine and the asphalt batch plant and the reclamation plan in 1983. Nevada County also approved 4 amendments. As you can see, they expanded the quarry, permitted processing off-site, required noise monitoring, and permitted a jaw crusher, which is like a large piece of machinery that breaks down larger boulders into smaller particles. Since 1983, there have been many judicial decisions that have come down that limits the authority that the Planning Commission has on amending this use permit now that it's been approved. Any new or modified condition would require substantial evidence of an impact, and these substantial evidence includes showing that the operation is detrimental to public health, safety, or welfare. And otherwise, any change to the conditions of approval would require both the applicant and the town to agree to those changes. The original permit, the 1983 permit, required a review of the quarry every 5 years. The last 5-year review took place in 2017. At that time, there were many concerns residents about odor, noise, and dust coming from the quarry. So at that Planning Commission meeting, the commission, the town, and Tigard agreed to modifying some existing conditions of approval, adding some additional conditions of approval, and changing the review cycle to a 1-year review cycle while these changes were implemented. So we've had a 1-year review cycle in 2018 and 2019, an additional one in 2019, 2020 we went to 2 years, and 2022 it was scheduled for December of 2022 but continued to January, which is why I have the 2023 there. One additional 2-year review cycle was agreed upon. So tonight, the role of the Planning Commission is to conduct this review of the quarry and those conditions of approval, focus on whether or not they're compliant with the use permit conditions, and look at a recommended modification to condition of approval 32, and that's the project amendment, changing it back to potentially to a 5-year review cycle. So the new and the new and modified conditions of approval that happened in 2017 are listed here. The ones that are grayed out have already been met. But quarterly noise monitoring, that continues. They revised their dust suppression plan. They maintain a complaint log that is sent to the town weekly. They are using a chemical odor control called EcoZorb in the asphalt batch. They have instituted a number of BMPs to try and reduce the odors. They installed an asphalt tank infiltration system. They use water trucks for dust control. There was a noise audit that was done prior to the quarterly noise monitoring consultants being on site, looking at where some of the larger, where the noise was coming from, where the complaints were coming from. They had a driver education program that helped tell the drivers of the trucks where to go, how to back up or how not to back up, how to kind of limit the impacts. And then they revised their traffic flow plan also to try to limit some of those noise impacts. So are they compliant? So this is a quick listing of the conditions. Number 3 is that they would submit all of their annual reports that they submit to Lahontan on their water quality is submitted to Town of Truckee. That has been submitted and is included as attachment 2. If there is any nighttime asphalt work or plant work, they notice the neighbors and the town. They have accomplished that in 2023 and 2024. The dust suppression plan was approved in 2019. There have been no changes. As I mentioned, the logs are submitted, EcoZorb's being used, the asphalt tank was installed, water trucks are used on windy days, and yes, and so they're all compliant with those conditions of approval. Condition of approval 13, this is the noise monitoring condition, and you'll see there the noise monitoring reports have been included. They have never not been in compliance with noise monitoring since the quarterly noise monitoring began. The consultants are paid by the town of Truckee. It's basically a pass-through agreement. The town hires the noise consultant, which is Ballard. They do a lot of noise monitoring and noise studies in our town. The applicant pays the town kind of in the same way that we would do like an environmental report. And then, of course, we would take actions if they were non-compliant, but they have not been non-compliant since the noise monitoring began. And this is just an example of where Ballard goes and places their noise monitoring equipment, so you can see some of these locations. They also ensure that the plant is fully operational the days that they come out, so that the asphalt plant's running, that they're producing, mining, etc. The proposed condition of approval change that staff is recommending is in orange. So this would change it to every 5 years following this review. And as staff has mentioned in the staff report, the mine remains compliant with the conditions of approval. We've kind of gone over this in the 1 year and 2 year process. It does seem that complaints are moving in a downward trend as compared to years past. A lot of the best management practices have come back online or have come online and may attribute to that reduction in complaints. And also staff mentions that if they were to become non-compliant, so if we noticed that they weren't meeting their conditions of approval, or we heard from Lahontan or the Air Quality Management District that they weren't, that the permit was revoked or they were in violation, staff could always bring this use permit back to the Planning Commission. So we don't need to wait for 5 years. We could bring it back for review or possible revocation. I mean, we'd obviously wouldn't go straight to that, but we'd bring it back to discuss with the applicant if there were issues that arose. So that's some of the reasoning behind why staff is comfortable supporting the return to the 5-year review. Condition of approval number 40. So odor really remains as the kind of main complaint, even though it has gone down. How Tykert addressed this in 2017 was to attempt to schedule asphalt production when there's not an inversion layer, try to avoid the morning and evening because of that. They use storage tanks, so they'll produce the asphalt and they'll store it for later use. They installed something called a blue smoke control system, and they relined the asphalt oil tanks. Staff, of course, can't completely verify compliance with the odor BMPs. We're not out there checking to see if they're using the storage tanks. And many times, Tykert acknowledges that the asphalt production does need to occur when it's needed. So if Caltrans needs it for a night project, they're going to have to make the asphalt then, or if the town needs it or another entity. The odor complaints remain, but are reduced, and there are questions. The odor may not be indicative of a health risk. The only sampling we know of is the sampling at the source, which is what the Air Quality Management District does. However, there is no sampling where the residents are complaining that they're smelling the odor. So odor is an air quality or an emissions issue, and how this looks is at the federal level, the EPA sets national emission standards. At the state level, we have the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. They set our California emission standards, and then our local air districts are in charge of looking at local businesses and stationary sources of emission issues. Our local air district is the Northern Sierra Air Quality Management District. Odor issues fall under their Rule 205, which I'll read quickly. Nuisance. A person shall not discharge from any source whatsoever such quantities of air, contaminants, or other material which cause injury, detriment, nuisance, or annoyance to a considerable number of persons or to the public, or which endanger the comfort, repose, health, or safety of any such persons or the public, or which cause to have natural tendency to cause injury or damage to business or property. This rule exactly mirrors our California Health and Safety Code air resources section, and every air quality management district has this rule within their regulatory framework. So staff believes that the Air Quality Management District is the correct agency for residents to speak to when they have odor or dust complaints, as this falls under their purview for their air quality permit. Staff had done some research 2 years ago for the last review. As I mentioned, everyone has the nuisance rule, all those air quality districts. There was an example, there was an EIR for a different asphalt plant where they stated that an odor was not a potential impact because it'd be regulated by the local AQMD, and they have to invest complaints and require operational changes if necessary. And also there's an example of an asphalt plant in Irvine where air quality came in to research any kind of odor complaint. Staff directed residents to contact both CARB and our local air quality management district if they have issues with odors or dust. I did reach out to our kind of resident neighbor group to ask if anyone had done that over the last 2 years, and it did not appear that anyone had or did not respond. So I'm not sure if that's changed anything, or if maybe they have come out and there hasn't been an issue. As for dust, and this is a picture from 2 years ago, there really are few dust complaints. There were 3 over the course of the last 2 years. I contacted the Air Quality Management District. They said that the quarry is in compliance with all of their dust suppression and their air quality permitting. Also, dust is an emissions issue, so if a resident has an issue seeing with the dust, they should also contact our Air Quality Management District. Staff feels like the limited amount of dust complaints really are kind of one-offs. We understand that if it gets windy and the truck hasn't passed by right at that moment, you might see some dust. It doesn't feel like a regular continuing impact as it might have been in the past. So tonight there were no public comments sent in via email. However, there is this real-time complaints that Tykert logs in from the residents, and I did address how many those were, and from which and how many households had called in and gave and provided complaints to Tykert that is then sent to the town of Truckee. So staff summary: staff believes that the quarry remains in compliance. Tykert did previously implement several measures that were intended to reduce these impacts. The odor issues do seem to persist. I think it's the nature of the asphalt plant, and that if it's a nuisance, residents should contact our Air Quality Management District. The outside agencies and our noise consultant have all replied that the quarry remains in compliance. And Tykert has requested to return to a 5-year review cycle, and staff does support that request. Staff recommendation is to adopt Resolution 2024-16, which has an incorrect date at the end of it, saying that this meeting was 2 years ago, so with a minor date edit addressing the December 17th date, thereby taking the following actions: approve a project amendment to allow the quarry review process to return to a 5-year timeframe, and determine that this amendment is exempt from CEQA. And of course, the Planning Commission can take alternative actions, which would be continuing the public hearing or denying the requested project amendment. The appeal period would end at 5 p.m. on December 27th. I believe, I of course am open for questions. I believe that the applicant also has a presentation that they would like to give.
All right, well, want to do your presentation? Thank you.
Try this again? All right. Green means go, huh? All right. I'll start over again. Michael Smith from Tykert, Aggregate Resource Development Manager. Once again, we were here 2 years before, and this presentation, I believe 3 of you saw. In light of the 2 new members, I thought I'd go through it very quickly just to be get everybody up to speed and answer any questions that folks may have. So, great. So as talked about, and one of the things that was very important to us was, starting in 2017 when we sat down with the neighbors and understood the realm of the complaints and how we could do things better, we put in a number of improvements. This listing here on the slide just shows starting in 2018 where we started lining tanks, where we put in the carbon filtration system, and then finally in 2020, which was the large Butler Justice Blue Smoke System, which basically a giant vacuum that sucks up the odor once trucks are being loaded and then runs it through a carbon filter. You can see on sealing and resealing of asphalt tanks and the addition of EcoSorb, those are ongoing items. So when we began them in 2018 and 2019, we still continue to do that for every operation that we have. All told, so far, since we started this process in 2017, we're up to about $1.7 million in improvements to the plant. To note, that also includes some of the dust suppression and some of the other items that we put in place as well. And as Chantel mentioned, I won't go through this unless folks have questions on it, but the big 3, odor, noise, and dust, there were a number of items that we put into play beginning back in the operation starting in 2018 after our first planning commission. In particular, Chantal talked about the odor, where we've reduced oil temperatures in our mix. We've tried to batch it early, so we're not doing it in the middle of the night. In particular, on warm nights, we are required to do a fair amount of night work by Caltrans and by the town of Truckee. We don't have a say in when we can do that, but we're trying as best we can to ramp up that oil production prior to those evening jobs so we can store it earlier and not have it running in the evening. Probably on noise, the number of listings there, but probably one of the biggest ones we implemented was all of our backup alarms were replaced on our vehicles with what we call squawkers. They are OSHA approved, but the noise doesn't transfer up the hill like the beepers were. I think we found great success in including those, and have actually started to do that in other plants as well. And then under dust, probably the biggest thing we do is the water truck we found is our best remedy for dust control. We do also use, we spray the roads twice a year with mag chloride, which kinds of put a coating on the dust roads or on the dusty roads, and then you can water on top of that. And we feel like the dust is really not an issue for us anymore. And so this one, once again, this is basically, Chantal talked about this, but we are governed in our air quality emissions by the state and local air districts. We work with them regularly. I've got a couple folks here in the audience in case there's real specific questions about this. But we are very confident that there's a difference between odor, which we understand some folks may be smelling, and an actual health risk. And the 2 are very separate. And the air district is basically stated the same with us, that we are not a nuisance or a threat from a health risk standpoint. So, but I would also say, and it's further on the slide, that as new technology becomes available, we're always going to be open to other improvements that we can continue to make on the facility. So, and this just shows, this was a really important slide. The blue smoke system, which is shown in the picture on the left, when we implemented that, and note that the numbers on the right, in 2020, just with the carbon filtration, we reduced levels of particulates 43%, or of the odors 43%. The blue smoke actually reduced it to 86%. So a significant investment, but also a significant change in what was happening on the plant site. And once again, to note that even before we put these improvements in, we were below thresholds that were considered to be dangerous. Once again, a little bit of redundancy here, but the best available of technology and controls we have put in place. What we do here is more advanced than in any of our other asphalt plants in the region. We continue to work with the air districts on any improvements that we can make. We were very pleased that on bullet number 4, from some of the high notes in 2018, when we had several individuals come out to address, or at least to voice their concerns about odor. We're down to 3 individuals during the year of 2023. They were on a couple of different occasions. They were heavy load days. They were some of our highest volumes were on those days, but we were down to just the 3 at least over this past year. And then on the second to last bullet, it's important for us too just to understand there are things that we don't control. One that we always talk about is the inversion layer that happens. For those who don't know the geography of the area, our plants in the valley, there's a hillside, the Glenshire residents are above. When you get those warm evenings in the fall, that tends to trap everything right below the hillside. And obviously we avoid production if we can on those days, but we're not always in that position because of some of our contracts and because some of the speculation or the requirements of Caltrans in the town of Truckee. Let's see. And then basically, part of the reason that we're asking to go back to 5 years is that at this point in time, there is no other feasible practice that we can put into play to address odor from this facility. Once again, we'd be open to doing so if there was, but at this time, there is nothing that we see or the industry has in place. So, this slide we put together just real quick. Commissioner Claren, you may recall, I believe it was your first meeting actually 2 years ago, and you raised the idea of tarping. We immediately went and looked into that. What we found is that, because I think a suggestion was made that you said you had to tarp trucks that go to the dump, which is actually a true statement. Within the state law, California Vehicle Code, it actually exempts asphalt trucks from being tarped. The feeling, I think, is that with rubbish trucks, the idea is that you're keeping things from falling out of the truck and ending up on the road. With asphalt, the tarping is not solid, so it doesn't seal. It doesn't necessarily contain everything inside. Part of the issue. The other part is that as soon as you got out onto the highway, it's not required. So it really defeats the purpose of requiring tarping just inside the plant. There's also a little bit of an issue from us from a standpoint of safety. If folks tarp in a plant, put their tarping on, immediately as soon as they get out, they're going to get out of the trucks, untarp, and get on the road. And having them out on the road, or outside of the plant, climbing up on their vehicles is always an issue that we have, even with aggregate trucks, with people trying to top off and so on. So we're very cognizant of that. So with that, basically, as mentioned on a couple occasions, we will continue to work with the community, continue to work with the town. Any ideas we're open to listening to, and any suggestions or any technology we will gladly put into play if it's feasible and we can it can make improvements to the area. We fully recognize that we do not create a health risk. We understand that odors are not indicative of a health risk, but we will continue to work on anything that's possible. And then lastly, we would just concur with staff's report. With all the conditions as noted on there. We'd love to see it go back to 5 years, but of understanding that if we get called back in sooner than that, we will do so. So with that, happy to answer any questions the commission may have, or leave it up to any neighbors who may want to speak.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Clarifying questions from the commission. I see Coral. Mike.
Thanks, Mr.
Mike.
Actually, I forgot my glasses. So.
Coral, you Mike.
I noted that in the staff report, there was a mention of the trucks, the independent contractors' trucks, as it related to noise, and that there was going to be an education program for them. Just wondered how that's been going.
It's pretty much all, it is all in play now. So it was a couple things. It was one, we don't own the trucks. So as you mentioned, they're independent. So we don't control them, but we can create rules on our site that they have to follow. So a lot of that came out of the noise audit, where we require squawkers on all the vehicles, where we reoriented the site. What we found was happening through the noise audit was many of the trucks were bringing recycled rubble in, and they were backing up. And as they're backing up, they're backing up into the hillside. So we reconfigured our piles to turn them around, so they're now no longer backing up to the hillside, but rather out towards the street. There's a large sign as you enter the plant with all the truck rules on there. At this stage, most of the truckers know the plant facility, they know the rules, and I would suggest that they're all abiding by those rules.
Any other clarifying questions for the applicant from other commissioners? Sammy? How about for staff, anybody? I'm going to open up for public comment for this particular item, 7.1. Oh. Please state your name, and you have 3 minutes to comment.
Thank you. My name is Mike Jocelyn, and I live at 14700 Royal Way in Glenshire. I want to thank the Commission for taking the effort over the past several years, maybe a decade or so, in working to resolve a lot of the problems that have occurred at Tykert. I think when the county was managing this, they kind of gave away the shop in terms of the things that they did allow. So thank you, commissioners, and thank you for the staff for all of their effort. You know, the Tykert facility is the largest industrial facility in the town of Truckee, so it deserves the kind of attention that you give it. And unfortunately, although we enjoy the smooth roads that we have in Truckee, it's really the residents of Glenshire that are burdened with many of the effects of the plant. And we've talked a lot about the improvements that have been made. Some of them have been very good, but the one problem that remains is odor. And it's pervasive during January and August months every year. So, you know, the complaints that come in, people are beginning to say, hey, nothing's being done. No improvements are changing. We're still getting odors. You know, the odors that occur on the ridge really are spread throughout the community. I can drive down to the market, Glenshire Market, and smell the odors on some days. And the complaints, even though the numbers have gone down, it really is not indicative of the actual real situation, because when we call in, we give our complaint, goes into a log, and then it just gets passed on. We don't really see any kind of improvement or change in the operations in terms of what was promised. You know, reducing nighttime work, changing or maximizing their effort to reduce the amount of odors. So I've contacted the Air Quality Board and talked to them last year, and they basically said, hey, we're understaffed. We don't really have time to deal with this issue. They are not working really to try to help us resolve it in our neighborhood. Now, I haven't taken the effort to make a formal complaint, but your staff report maybe says that's what we need to do. But what we really need is the help from the town. We need the help from the town to help us approach the Air Quality Board to get them more engaged with us. And I'm hoping that as you look at what you can do, that you put in a condition that the town will work with the residents to inspire our regional Air Quality Board to take a more thorough investigation as opposed to just coming every 3 years. So I'm hoping that's something that you can add to your action. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Deliberation. Coral, I see you're writing notes. No? Dan?
Maybe I should have asked this question of the applicant, but there was a comment about there's no further feasible practices. curious, does that just mean feasible as in it's cost prohibitive to do something above and beyond, or is there actually no other technology, nothing else that could possibly be done?
Yeah, I believe that, and I'll look over this way a little bit, but I believe that there is no technology at this stage that beyond what we've already done. This is the state-of-the-art equipment to capture emissions and to filter them out.
So in addressing this gentleman's comments,
Yeah, I think, well, first off, and you probably did this erroneously or a little bit in there, but so we're closed right now. We only operate roughly April to November. So just to be clear, and unfortunately, those are some of the warmer months when you get into the middle of summer. But at this stage, everything that we can do, we are putting into play. The one comment that I also heard was the nighttime work, and once again, that is governed by Caltrans, by their. They don't want to be closing down, obviously, the roads in the middle of the day, and so they require work to be done at night. We have to have the asphalt has to be batched at a certain temperature and a certain time for their requirements to make spec. So there really is not anything else we can do there.
Good.
yeah.
Over this way, Sammy, anything? No. Dave?
I support staff's recommendations. Ready to make ready to make a proposal to move on to the next agenda item.
Have at it.
So I'd like to make a motion that we adopt Resolution 2024-16 with a minor date edit, thereby taking the following actions. Number one, approve a project amendment to allow the quarry review process to return to a 5-year time frame. And number two, determine the project amendment exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act CEQA guidelines per section 15061B3 general rule exemption.
Can I have a second, please? We could open up for discussion after a second.
I'll second.
Thank you.
Well, our public commenter was requesting a higher level of engagement from the Air Board. And I'm just turning on it, was like, what, I don't know what that would look like, since the public has the opportunity to contact the Air Board now, and that's.
And so, you know, at our 2-year ago meeting when the Air Board came, the gentleman at that time said basically that they were probably not going to engage with this. My only idea was to contact the state board at the same time, because I maybe they are required to address residents' concerns if there's actual complaints. But I'm not sure how much power we have, and especially if they're, especially if they're compliant with their permit. But I do understand the gentleman's frustration. It would be nice if they would come out and go to the homes and, test or whatever they do as an air quality management district.
It is their purview. I think that's where this belongs, just like the water permit, the discharge permit belongs with the water board. So I just didn't know if there was another way to add some little push on that. That's all I had.
Yeah, I'm not even sure how much more the town could do with the air board. That's their choosing.
It seems like the applicant has really tried very hard to be a good neighbor to me. That's the impression I get.
Any further discussion? Kaylee?
Chair Claren,
Yes.
Vice Chair Gove,
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman,
Yes.
Commissioner Kavanaugh,
Yes.
Commissioner Tate.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0 unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen, for showing up. Have a Merry Christmas. Okay, we're going to move on to item 7.2. 2040 General Plan Implementation, Development Code Amendments, Mixed-Use Zoning Districts, By Right Housing, Cleanup Amendments, Zoning Map Amendments, General Plan Land Use Map Cleanup Amendments, and amendments to zoning district names. Staff presentation, Yumi and Laura.
And Chantal. You get all three of us.
Oh, it doesn't say that on my green.
Well, mostly it's Chantal and me. Yumi will be chiming in as needed. Okay. We like to keep it interesting.
Kaylee.
All right. So we're here tonight as our latest round of talking about our first general plan implementation. We came in August, did an overview. We were back in October talking about the development code amendments, zoning map amendments, general plan cleanup amendments. And tonight we're looking for the commission to make a recommendation. And then our next step would be to go to town council. Just click right there. I always use that. So just a quick overview of what we've talked about previously. We have our development code amendments, which include the creation of the new mixed-use zoning districts, which are CMU and NMU, the creation of by right housing, and some cleanup amendments for the general plan consistency. We have the zoning map amendments, also for consistency with the general plan land use designations, and then some amendments to the land use diagram and noise contours. Since we saw you in October, we made some edits, some of which were at the request of the commission. We made a change to the low-density residential zoning district, how that was described to make it match a different section in the development code. We added animal raising and keeping of household pets as a permitted use in both NMU and CMU. That was also a commissioner request. The FAR definition, there was a request that we clarify how that's measured. So we made that edit, and we also updated the gross floor area definition to be consistent. And then we made a number of edits based on discussions with the hospital. So we added a new definition for medical services, hospital emergency facilities, and made that a permitted use in the neighborhood commercial and general commercial zoning districts. They have some of those parcels within their campus area, and their interest was in making sure that they had availability of those, using those parcels if they needed for their emergency facilities. We also kept the conditionally allowed use for medical services hospitals in the CN and CG zoning districts, and added a footnote that specified that that's for parcels within the hospital campus area. And then we retained the consistency between the land use designation and those two zoning districts. So tonight we have two topics for the commission to discuss. The first is allowed uses in the mixed-use zoning districts, and the second is minimum commercial requirements in those same districts. I'll turn it over to Chantal for the first of those discussion topics.
As Laura mentioned, our first topic is a discussion on the allowed uses in the mixed-use zoning districts. Just a little refresher, we're talking about our corridor mixed-use land use designation and now zoning district. That is in the Gateway area. It's where general commercial zoning is currently. It's this kind of dark pink, so dark pink here, and then a little bit of the highway commercial that's south of Highway 80. So in our 2040 general plan, this corridor mixed-use land use designation allows multifamily residential, retail, office, service, commercial, and public uses. It also has some kind of development standards and some density and intensity standards. Tonight, we will focus just on those land uses. Neighborhood mixed use, on the other hand, is mostly located in Donner Lake and two parcels in Glenshire. This is where our neighborhood commercial and some residential zone districts are located. Our 2040 general plan, adopted general plan, speaks to allowing neighborhoods serving commercial uses such as restaurants, offices, and small retail, as well as multifamily residential. Really, the intent of neighborhood mixed use is to add in some neighborhood serving commercial to increase local services and to reduce vehicle trips for these residents. So at the request of the commission in October, staff was requested to review our master use table for manufacturing uses and look to see if any could be appropriate within the neighborhood mixed use zoning district. What staff found is that manufacturing uses are primarily only allowed in our manufacturing and downtown manufacturing zone districts. There's a very limited number of manufacturing uses allowed in other commercial districts, and it's things like recycling, and they usually require approval of a use permit. The purpose of a use permit is to review a land use activity that is desirable and compatible with adjacent land uses, but whose effects on the site and surroundings could not be determined before a proposal was made. Staff just wanted to mention, saying let's add manufacturing and use the use permit requirement in NMU would, staff wouldn't support that because likely it would just result in projects where staff would be recommending denial due to land use compatibility. We'd want something a little bit more refined and focused if we were to add anything like that. Staff does want to bring projects to the Planning Commission where we can recommend approval, and we want applicants, to propose projects where they would likely be compatible. And then if we're thinking about what's desirable in the zone district, we need to consider both the general plan consistency and nuisance mitigation. Historically, we do this through separating incompatible uses through our zoning. The commission discussed adding manufacturing uses to the zoning district. Staff does not support the addition of any manufacturing uses for these reasons. First, it would be inconsistent with the 2040 general plan. It's not a neighborhood serving commercial use, and really, like I mentioned, the intent is to allow flexibility to add residential uses to a neighborhood commercial zone district, reducing vehicle trips and providing goods and services for those residents. We feel manufacturing uses are not compatible with residential uses. They're usually not allowed in close proximity due to impacts, noise, dust, odors, vehicle trips, and vibration. Really, the purpose of zoning is to provide separation between incompatible uses and reduce these potential conflicts. And sort of the most important part is that our development code does provide other options for uses that are not allowed specifically in a zone district. So potentially for smaller manufacturing uses, which we would like to discuss. The three main modes to allow a pathway for uses to operate where they're not allowed is the use of an accessory use. So this is allowing up to 25% of a project's floor area to be used as have a different potential use. This limited size maintains that the overall business is consistent with the purpose and the intent of any zoning district, and because it's smaller, would reduce potential impacts. So we see this a lot with a restaurant that wants to do, a microbrewery beverage production, or a coffee shop which would like to do a little bit of coffee roasting, or a baked goods shop that wants to do a little bit of bakery or baking or food production. But it would be minor. The impact would be minor because it's only 25% of the floor area. We also have home occupations, or home occs. This allows non-residential uses within residential properties. There are limits on the size, how many vehicle trips would be involved, how many employees could be involved. No uses that involve hazardous materials or that would create impacts are allowed. And the resident of the property is operating this home occupation, so that kind of helps ensure that impacts are minimized. If you're living there, you're going to be careful about what kind of dust, fumes, odors you could potentially operate under. You're probably sleeping at night and not operating these home occupation. Your home occupation. We have a lot of our like potters and ceramics, jewelers, candle makers, that sort of thing going on with home occ. Some bakery, some cottage food industry. And then our more intensive and kind of more flexible option is live-work or work-live units. So this allows a resident to operate a business on the property where they live. There are some requirements for square footage breakdowns depending on if it's work-live or live-work. And it requires the business operator to live on site. This also helps, as we mentioned, with the home occs. If you're on site, any impacts you're creating, you're also dealing with. So it lessens the possibility of neighboring resident impacts. Last week, we had a commissioners, I'm not sure, suggestion for a new land use that could be added. Because of when it was received, we weren't able to put it in the staff report. So we've tried to summarize it here, and we have this slide if the commission wants to discuss We can bring the slide back up since this might be new for some of the commissioners. The proposed definition for artisanal manufacturing is a small-scale, craft-focused production activity where items are produced one at a time by the artisan themselves without employing additional laborers. This use is intended for the creation of high-quality, handcrafted products in limited quantities. The proposed maximum size is 5,000 square feet. Proposed permit requirements are zoning clearance for corridor and neighborhood mixed use, a use or minor use permit in residential zoning districts. Only the artisan is permitted to operate the facility, so no additional employees. Production shall be conducted entirely indoors. You must be compliant with noise ordinances, no odors or vibrations beyond property boundaries, mechanical means to offset noise, smells, etc. may be employed. There could be a small retail component. The use would have to comply with local hazardous materials regulations and incorporate sustainable practices and energy efficiency. And applicant must obtain land use approvals before commencing operations, and there could be a permit required for the use of technology to offset noise or air pollution. So this was a proposed new land use definition, though staff took a look at it and had some recommendations or thoughts about it. So staff still believes that the appropriate way to handle this is through our existing development code approval paths, accessory use, work, live, or home occ for the reasons that we've discussed. As I mentioned, home occs are usually our traditional kind of pathway for small artisans. However, if the commission is interested in recommending this as an allowed use, we just had some considerations that we wanted to discuss. First, as I mentioned, this would likely require a general plan amendment to allow a use such as this. And this makes sense too, because if we are going to allow for more intensive uses that weren't kind of daylighted during the general plan process when the residents that live next to neighborhood commercial, now NMU, we would want to make sure that there was a public process to make sure that everyone was on board with changing and more intensifying the uses in their area. Maximum size, we believe that 5,000 square feet maximum size is quite large. A lot of the parcels are about 6,000 square feet. We have some new manufacturing spaces that are either coming online or already online in our industrial or manufacturing zone districts and Pioneer Commerce Center on Industrial Way. And those are mostly in the project I worked on, 1,100, but 1,300 to 1,900 square feet. We believe that a retail component would be necessary to kind of comply with the intent of that zone district. So, if the commission wanted to look at that, we would recommend that we'd have a larger retail component in it along with this zone district or along with this manufacturing use. Staff believes that it should only be an outright permitted use in manufacturing, but if it's allowed in CMU and NMU, it should require use permit approval to allow neighboring property owners who could be impacted to provide comments. This is different than, staff said just using a use permit to allow open-ended manufacturing uses wouldn't be the right way. But if artisanal manufacturing was a land use and we had a more focused and concentrated requirements, that maybe the use permit would be the right direction for this land use, new land use definition. Staff agrees with the employee restriction. Staff agrees with the operational guidelines, but really would want stronger language to address impacts, maybe a noise study, depending on what that, what the manufacturing use is. As noticed in the staff report, it's hard to anticipate the operational characteristics of businesses that are new, and a lot of times this ends up in code compliance issues. So we really would want to get out ahead of that and make sure we had, really good guidelines. Of course, everything would have to be compliant with local regulations. Staff is unsure how we could incorporate language about requiring sustainable or energy efficient practices beyond what we have. Obtaining land use approvals, we agree, that's always required. We're not quite sure, we'd want to have a discussion on what the permits for the use of technology to offset noise and air pollution would involve. And then we would want to address, we have screening and buffering standards for other areas of town where there's non-residential uses abutting residential uses. Since the idea of these mixed-use zone districts is to actually put the residents in next to the uses, we'd really want to discuss more stringent screening and buffering standards to address the impacts to residents. As there was a discussion in the proposal about making sure odor impacts were limited to the property boundary, we might be looking at limited to the unit size because this is a mixed-use area and the property boundary would probably include some residential, or would include residential most likely. So for this first discussion item, just the staff summary, staff doesn't support just outright adding manufacturing uses to a neighborhood mixed-use zone district because of consistency with our general plan, compatibility with residential uses, and the other options that do exist. As far as the new land use definition, would likely still require a general plan amendment. There are those other options, but of course, Commission, this is the time for you to discuss and determine if you'd like to recommend staff to bring it to council for more discussion. And as I mentioned, we've highlighted some areas that we would recommend some additional consideration if that's the direction that the Commission chooses to go in.
Okay, so that brings us to our next discussion topic. The minimum commercial requirements, this is something that the Commission talked about a bit at the last meeting and asked us to take a bit of a deeper look at. So just a reminder in terms of what we consider mixed use, it's basically different uses on the same property or within the same building. They're usually part of an integrated development that doesn't necessarily have to be residential and commercial. It could be just various different types of uses within the same project. Under the state definition, when they talk about a housing project, housing development project, that could include mixed-use developments that have at least 2/3 of the square footage for residential uses. So as we were originally looking at this, we were trying to figure out how, we could differentiate a mixed-use project with the amount of commercial that we're trying to achieve from something that would be considered a housing project under the state. So we think having a minimum commercial requirement makes sense to help with that. So at the October hearing, what we recommended was to require 1/3 of the floor area for projects in the CMU zoning district to be commercial and half of the floor area for projects in NMU to also be commercial. And the purpose of that was to make sure that these projects would be consistent with the intent of the land use designations, especially in NMU, where we're really looking at those neighborhood serving commercial uses. So the Commission asked us to do some research and see what other jurisdictions do to achieve their desired mix of uses in a mixed-use project. So we looked at, I believe, a total of 12 other jurisdictions in California, and there's a pretty wide spectrum of ways that this is handled. A lot of places do have a minimum percentage that they require. It ranged anywhere from 10% or 1,000 square feet, whichever is less, up to 80%. So obviously we're, pretty much right in the middle of that range with what we're proposing for NMU. Other places prohibit residential uses on the ground floor, or they have requirements that commercial uses have to be along the street frontage, and then they have certain depth requirements for those commercial tenant spaces. So we do have some standards in the rail yard and also in the downtown Truckee plan for that type of ground floor commercial requirements, as well as in the objective design standards. We think that having a minimum percentage allows more flexibility since it's not dictating a particular design necessarily. And we do want to still be able to support horizontal and vertical mixed use, this is a diagram that's actually from the general plan, along with this photo, which was in the plan to sort of show what the idea behind the NMU zoning district was. So we do think that having some kind of minimum commercial requirement is important to make sure that projects that come forward are consistent with what the general plan envisioned. The Commission could recommend either prohibiting residential uses on the ground floor or requiring commercial uses on the street frontage. Like I said, we think that having just a minimum requirement would provide more flexibility. And also having a certain percentage would also make it sure that that general plan consistency is maintained. So our recommendation is still for the 50% commercial uses in NMU and the 1/3 commercial uses in CMU. But we would like the commission to talk about all these different options tonight. Obviously, there's different ways you could make a recommendation based on what you think would best achieve the general plan vision. So we're hoping that you'll make a recommendation tonight to the council on that. We received a public comment from Jeannie McCarthy. She had submitted a comment asking for consideration of adding a craftsman use to the NMU zoning district, and that was described as a skilled trade artisans that make products with their hands. We also received a public comment this afternoon that we didn't have time to incorporate, but we did include it in the public comment that was available to the commission, and that was from Gavin Ball. So our recommendation tonight is to adopt Resolution 2024-13, taking the following actions, recommending approval to the Town Council of the following general plan implementation actions. The 2024 Development Code amendments for mixed-use zoning districts, by-right housing and cleanup amendments, the zoning map amendments, and general plan cleanup amendments, and recommending that the amendments are exempt from CEQA. So we're happy to take questions on any of those topics.
Clarifying questions, anyone? Dan, go for it.
Sure. I have some questions on the whole attachments, and so maybe some of this stuff is from the last meeting, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. On the zoning maps, you have the colored areas, and then you have the red outlined areas. I just want clarity, like, are we talking about the colored area or the red outlined area?
The red outlined area. The
Yep.
colors are the old zoning districts.
And so what happens to the area outside of the red outline?
They will remain as they are.
Oh, they will remain. Okay, then I was looking at some of the highway commercial zoning, and you did answer my question this morning around the highway commercial there at Coldstream, why that is not being addressed at this time. But I was curious why there are still changes being made to the highway commercial zoning when it's a zoning classification that is going to be eliminated for the general plan. So like page I-36 and I-47, we're making changes to highway commercial zoning, and yet the classification we're not supposed to have anymore.
Well, in the meantime, we will continue to have highway commercial until we change the zoning. So we're just ensuring that that's being addressed this time until we do.
Like you're eliminating restaurants, drive-in or with drive-through facilities.
That's a general plan policy that's already in place.
No drive-throughs.
No drive-through.
And the FAR is going from 0.2 to 0.25.
That's the general plan commercial designation. So we're just ensuring that it's consistent in the meantime until we move forward with a new zoning or assigning an existing zoning to that site.
Do you know when that will be?
We have a action matrix that we're working on in terms of zoning. We're talking about that and maybe the biz zoning over at the Pioneer Commerce Center. So it is next on our, it is one of the next items on our agenda to work on, among other things like the town density bonus.
But I will say that the council is also going to work on their 2-year work program. And so what we work on is really driven by what the council decides with the work program. So although we can propose to them, here's the succession of what we think we should address next, ultimately they make that decision about the order of what we work on.
Yeah, I just know these specific items were addressed as listed as short-term focus items in the general plan update.
There's lots of short-term items. So,
Yeah.
There's, I don't know, off the top of my head, probably like 50 of them. So we picked the ones that we thought were prioritizing what we heard from the community as important as part of the general plan update. But again, the council also has other things that they have to consider, and so they can change that. But at least as far as what we're proposing as part of the work program is to look at the rezoning.
Okay, then I had on page, jump around here a little bit, 65. The half and third floor area, just to be clear, floor area it's the ground floor area. It's the footprint, not square footage. I actually looked, I couldn't actually find a definition of floor area anywhere in the general plan or anywhere in I know what floor area ratio is.
Yeah, I think the floor area definition refers you to the gross floor area definition. It's like cross-referenced.
Are we talking total square footage of a multi-story building, or are we talking just the footprint of the ground floor?
So the way this is written would be based on the total floor area of the project.
So, I mean, to say a project is half commercial or a third commercial in CMU or NMU zoning, I mean, I wonder, are we going to find developers who actually want to do those projects? Or are we killing these projects?
It's not just developers, it's existing buildings too. So it's entrepreneurs and the average Joe that wants to create a business and live in his house and have his business. It's that person that I'm concerned about.
Gentlemen, I think we're straying into deliberation.
Well, I guess I'm asking staff specifically. I want a clarification on what floor area means. And I think I'm specifically asking for new projects. If someone proposes a new project, it is a mixed-use project. That means if they're building a 2-story building that's 15,000 square feet, they got to have 7,500 square feet of commercial.
Yes.
And it has to all be on the ground floor, too.
It doesn't have to be on the ground floor. You could
Oh,
have
you just
second
can't-
floor office or something like that.
Yeah, but you can't have ground floor residential.
We're not prohibiting it. That is what some jurisdictions do. So, I mean, some places have a combination where they say there's a minimum amount of commercial and then you also have that street frontage requirement. So there could be a combination of things that other jurisdictions do.
Currently, our general plan allows for horizontal and vertical mixed use, so you could do residential in the back, residential. You can mix it up however you'd like, but what we were presenting is if you didn't want to just say 50% and you wanted to use different methods of breaking up the commercial and the residential, ground floor could be an option.
Business in the back, business in the front, party in the back, Dan.
Okay. Then I had page 56, this mobile home park conversion. And I'm curious, is that specifically talking about the mobile home parks there on Donner Pass Road by Loomis Bank?
So I think this language was copied over from the current standards. I'm trying to remember which section we used as the template for this. It was either the DMU or it was CG. So that's language that's already in there for another zoning district, so we carried it over here.
Any affordable units lost in the zoning districts, CMU and MU, through a conversion of a mobile home park to non-affordable housing or other uses shall be replaced at a 1-to-1. How do we know that the mobile home parks are affordable? How are we classifying that? Anyone checked their rents to confirm they actually are meeting the affordability requirements? Because if you took those mobile home parks and someone said they want to go build apartment building, how is that? I'm just curious, how many units are affordable?
I think that's part of the application. If a mobile home applicant wanted to come in and convert their project site, we would say as part of that, you need to provide us what your current rent.
But are those the only sites we're talking about? Are there?
Yes, those are the only, there's 3 mobile home parks on Donner Pass Road.
But they're all next to each other?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then one on Donner Lake.
There's one in Donner Lake too, but that's, got it. I kind of had a general question around use permits, minor use permits, and permitted, and zoning clearance versus a minor use permit and versus a use permit. So what is it? A use permit has to go to planning commission, a minor use permit, staff level?
Zoning administrator.
Oh, zoning administrator?
So zoning clearance is staff level, zoning verification is staff level, minor use permit is zoning administrator, use permit is planning commission.
And what's the difference between a zoning clearance and a minor use permit?
Usually the intensity of the project, potential impacts. It's a public hearing, just a kind of public hearing light. There's still public comment. There's noticing, etc.
And typically minor use permits are like more at a neighborhood level rather than maybe a community-wide level.
Okay. Questions?
I think a lot of our map actions end up being minor use permits too, right? Certificate of compliance, some of our subdivision map requirements.
That's all I got.
Thanks, Dan. Sammy?
I was just wondering if you could explain the process, or if there is one, for an existing, maybe non-conforming use to kind of, I don't know, have one of those allowances that we talked about, either home occupation or live work or accessory uses, if there is a pathway.
So if it was an existing residence and they wanted to do a home occ, they would just submit for a home occ permit. If it was a commercial business and they wanted to add an accessory use, I guess we would have to look at what the underlying permit was, because potentially it would be amending whatever that was. So if it was a permitted use originally, say it was a retail use, and then they wanted to modify that to add the accessory use. The idea is that the accessory use doesn't trigger, even if it was something that would normally require a use permit in a different zone, it wouldn't trigger it in that zone because you're limiting it to that 25%. So it kind of streamlines it if you meet those accessory use criteria.
Thanks.
Is that it? Coral?
And I apologize for not trying to track this down before I got here, but where does, as a part of a usage go, where does co-working spaces fit in? Is that offices, business, and professional? Is that kind of a use?
I'm not sure if we've specifically defined it, but we definitely have some co-working spaces. So probably it would be just considered an office use.
So that would be something that would looks like that would be permitted then in the mixed use areas.
Right.
That was my question. There's other things, but.
I got a question in regards to multifamily. Do we have a definition for like a dormitory housing?
The closest thing we have is a rooming and boarding house.
Rooming and boarding
where
house.
you rent individual rooms, but they don't have cooking facilities.
Or workforce housing?
We have a workforce housing chapter. A lot of times when people think of employee housing, they kind of use those interchangeably. Under the development code, workforce housing is the housing that a project is required to build because it's adding employees that are generating additional need for housing.
So when we're talking about these multifamily opportunities in these neighborhood mixed-use zones, commercial mixed-use, our definition of multifamily is apartments, condominiums, things like that. We're talking about individual units. An individual unit makes it a multifamily. One family in one unit, one family in another unit. Yeah.
Yeah, and you could also have, townhomes, attached units,
Sure.
things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Do we have we ever looked at a definition for like a workforce dormitory? Like, let's say, for example, somebody wanted to build a housing facility that had, let's call it 6 bedrooms. Each bedrooms had 4 bunks. The bathrooms were, basically dormitory style, where you had a whole bunch of showers and stalls and facilities like that, and one big common area and a kind of almost a commercial style kitchen. Do we have any kind of definition for that or allowance for that in the code at all?
Not currently. I've talked to a couple of developers, one who was interested in potentially doing a new project. It was more like a dorm where you have the individual rooms that share like a central common space. They were smaller pods, was that the concept that they had. And then the other is an existing project that was looking at converting it into some kind of dorm style housing. And we were looking at whether we can use the rooming and boarding house definition and make some tweaks to that to allow that type of use. So that's actually a pre-app that we have in right now.
Thank you.
I'm trying to find it, but to go back to the hospital for a second, and you said the emergency services was in both CM and CMU and CG, but I thought I only saw it on one chart, not on both.
Yeah, we didn't add it to CMU. After talking with the hospital, they explained that their interest wasn't in having that use elsewhere in Gateway, but only within the campus area. So the parcels that it would be applicable to would be the CN and CG parcels that are within their property. So that's where we had it, was CN and CG.
So it's CN and CG, not CMU.
Correct.
All right, I got confused. Okay.
Okay, I think this, Dave, this is related to what you were asking. And I think the question's answered, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. In Table 210, so for allowed uses in CMU, so multifamily dwellings are not allowed, but that means that standalone multifamily dwellings are not allowed? Okay, so as long as there's a mixed-use component, the multifamily part's all good. Okay.
Correct. I mean, these were commercial zone districts, so I think the intent was to add the ability to put in more residential units, but not change them over to residential, solely residential zone districts.
And then employee housing is also not permitted in corridor mixed use and neighborhood mixed use. Employee, and is that again because of the standalone factor? And it seems like, we ought to be including employee housing wherever we darn well can. But that we can deliberate on that, I suppose. But I just wanted to make sure I understood why employee housing is not shown as being permitted in CMU or NMU.
So under the state definition, that's 6 or less units, that's like a single-family residence. So that might be, Chantal's going to try to pull up the current employee housing definition that we have in the code.
That definition mimics a state program that exists for single-family homes. That's how they call it. So we have that in our code.
Okay, so our development code definition of employee housing is a single-family residential dwelling, which wouldn't be allowed, for 6 or fewer employees, subject to the same development standards as single-family. This definition shall be in compliance with Health and Safety Code Section 17, a state health and safety code section.
Is there anything in our development code that would prevent someone from building part of their mixed-use building or development into dormitory-style lodging, or pods, which are big in some other jurisdictions?
So like I said, the closest definition we have is a rooming and boarding house. So we would have to look at whether that's an allowed use.
How do you even manage to understand if it's an employee housing, if it's 6 or fewer employees? If somebody wants to come in and submit a set of plans for a single family house that's got 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bedrooms.
It's all through the state for that permit. They have their own program.
Okay.
We just
but if a small regional employer wanted to come in and this may not even be germane to the conversation, but just it came up. And they said, I want to build a single family home in Truckee and here's my plans. Can I have a permit? Like, we're not going to check any of that, what they're using it for, right?
Right. We would just be permitting it as a single family.
Right.
And if they wanted to go through the state to get this, I'm not sure what the benefit of that would be.
Okay, so it's a state, there's some
option.
sort of state subsidy or benefit or something like that, okay, got it, thank you.
And I think we have, employers that have rented or built housing to do that exact thing. To
I think
care
we
for
do
the-
too.
Yeah, which is a great idea.
I think Tahoe Donner maybe converted some at some point.
I think the difference for us is that when someone's looking at doing that in a non-residential structure, so think of like a commercial structure that maybe was permitted as like a hotel or motel or something like that, and they want to use that for employee housing. So there's different standards there. Like a motel may not have a kitchen at all, or they might have different bathroom standards. And so Laura had already started doing some of this work to look at redefining our rooming and boarding house definition for that reason, because ours is pretty vague. It's an older definition, and as we've done research looking at other jurisdictions, it's much more explicit about like number of bathrooms for the number of rooms and what type of cooking facilities you have to have, so that it truly does function more like a dorm where you can be self-sufficient in it, where there's common area that you can cook, you have enough restrooms, all that stuff. So I think that's something that we'll bring back at some point. We just don't have that yet.
So just out of curiosity, instead of looking at other jurisdictions, why not talk to regional stakeholders, employees, and figure out what their needs are? Because, I mean, who gives a crap what Riverside, California is doing, right?
Well, because we have also done that. So we have had interactions with multiple employers who talk about what their needs are for their employees, but there's also different types of employees too. So yes, we look at other jurisdictions, but we do use the knowledge that we have from working in the town and working with employers here too, to also understand. I mean, there are people that work at the town that are also employers. So there is an understanding of that.
Fair enough.
Any further clarifying questions for staff? All right, I'm going to open up to public comment. Any comment for item 7.2 on the agenda? Please come up to the podium, state your name, you'll have 3 minutes. No. Green.
It was green. Okay,
Now
it
it's on.
Steve Morris, Streamline Hi-Fi. I stood up at the last meeting and talked about my small business and wanting to move forward potentially on purchasing a building in the Donner Lake NMU area and trying to get something that works for zoning for my business. First off, I'd like to really thank everybody here for proposing this artisanal manufacturing. I think that could be a very valid solution for me, for my business, and then potentially make this work. I'd love to breathe new life into that building. My business, again, keeps getting kind of pushed in this manufacturing zone, but I don't really believe that. I think it's not quite that. It's, my noise is down. I have all the same tools that they're currently using at the sign shop. No odors. I don't use any hazardous materials. What I put on a finish for my stereo consoles is a product called Rubio's, which is a food grade product, so it has no harsh chemicals in it. Very minimal vehicle trips for just about anything. So I think the artisanal manufacturing could be a really good solution, and I'm so excited that you guys are willing to consider it. Thank you for that. I did have a couple comments on if it does go through, some factors that you might want to consider. One is the retail component you mentioned. I think the staff had mentioned. I think that's fine. I plan on having a small showroom, but I wouldn't pigeonhole it into a certain size, because in this particular existing building, they're pretty small commercial spaces, like 300, 400, 500 square feet. So I think just maybe taking that into consideration would be great. I think also allowing maybe one employee would be a great consideration. Because for me, like, I have one stereo that weighs 450 pounds. So like just moving that by myself, I have to hire somebody sometimes to help me do little things like that, sanding, whatever. But so I think just at least one employee would be a great consideration too. And I think that's all I had. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm Jeannie McCarthy at McCarthy Sign Company. Rob and I have been in Truckee since 1978, and the building that Steve's talking about that he's looking at is mine. It's commercial. It's live, work, We purchased it to live, work, and do Rob's Sign Shop. It was approved when we bought the building in 2008 by the town of Truckee, okay? And we're still there. It's been 16 years. So I don't know about the square footage when you're talking about buildings, but the workshop is what Steve's interested in, and it's only 1,596 square feet. It's a workshop. It's not a manufacturing building. It's an old workshop, and it was attached to the back of the building back when the person built the building in 1963. And it's on a second level, but it's not the second level. You'd have to come look at the building to see this. It's just what it is. And so on the first level is retail. There's 5 offices. Second level is 2 apartments. I live in one of them, and we have tenants in the other. And I did offer the craftsmanship because that's one person building and designing one item. No trucks, no deliveries, no customers. Most of Rob's design work customers do online. Then they come pick up their signs. He doesn't install any longer. So there's no traffic, no fumes, no noise. We have never had a complaint from our neighbors in 16 years. We're kind of a unique little area down there at Donner Lake, and we have no sidewalks, and you never will. So it's not friendly base for walking. You're going to have to drive up to this building or ride your bike. You got those choices. So I'd appreciate somehow this get resolved, that McCarthy Sign Company be legal in this building. I've been told we're not. After 16 years, I'm not liking this very much because you decide to do whatever you're doing. But we know what we did when we bought the building. It was approved by the town of Truckee for us to be in this building, no permits. It was built for this use. The first owner did the same thing. We haven't changed anything down there. So, thank you.
Good evening, Chair Clare and Commissioners, staff. Ted Owens, Tahoe Forest Health System. I'd like to begin with just a sending of regrets for not being here tonight from Dylan Crosby, but family comes first. So he had something that he had to tend to this evening. I hope this isn't shocking, but I actually have some complimentary things to say. The hospital does appreciate the fact that staff met with our staff, discussing some of the issues that were of a high level of concern for us with the last draft. And while we certainly appreciate working with you, we're very happy with the result, in particular with the definition of medical services, hospital emergency facilities in particular, and the inclusion in Table 2-7. That really solves the big rock concerns that we had with the prior draft. So without commenting on the bulk of what you're discussing tonight, as things that pertain to the hospital, we're very pleased with staff's willingness to collaborate with us and address those issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Is there any other public comment? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. Move on to deliberation. Who wants to start?
I'd like to start, Mitch.
Go, Dave.
Okay, so Mitch and I, mostly me, decided to come up with this artisanal manufacturing definition. I would like you to bring it up. Thank you. There were a few things that got lost in translation from what Mitch and I proposed, and to what I heard on the staff report tonight. And most notably, one second. Okay, most notably was the employee restriction. The language that I had drafted said, employee restriction, only the artisan is permitted to operate within the facility. No, that's not the one. That's the wrong one. Oh, no, I'm sorry, yes. No additional employees or contractors may be employed for production purposes. So what's lost in translation is the language that says for production purposes. I had envisioned that having a staff member for retail assistance, a lot of small businesses employ outside bookkeeping. Sometimes those bookkeepers come in, they have to access your computer. I know that those days are kind of gone. Everything's, on the cloud and whatnot. But the vision that we had articulating this missing definition was that really it's for an artist to be able to make their thing, and whatever their thing is, right? Maybe it's a guitar, maybe it's it's a stereo console. There's you out in my neighborhood, and I understand that a lot of these things are falling under the definition of the HOMOC guideline or definition that's already there. There's a gentleman that does pottery out there on Glenshire Drive, and he's operating out of his garage. None of this can all be done by yourself, right? You need help from time to time. Hearing from Mr. Morris tonight, knowing that his equipment or his product can weigh over 400 pounds, we're not envisioning something where you have a forklift. This is an artisan creating something. So I think we should take a closer look at that, not pigeonholing him to being the only one. The point was hey, we're not going to have 20 guys cranking out the same thing day in and day out. So how do we define what is a handcrafted artistic product as opposed to, the Keebler elves making 50,000 IKEA bookshelves and then putting them out the door?
Maybe the word manufacturing in the title is incorrect.
Well, so fair enough.
It does meet the definition of manufacturing in the dictionary or our code. So
the whole point of the conversation here is that we are trying to address something that is not being represented, our community members that aren't represented in the code. So if we want to sub out a different word for manufacturing, then let's figure out what that word is. Somebody grab the thesaurus and let's figure it out. But I think what we're trying to do is accommodate community members and come up with a compromise. If we go back before Nevada County, before the town of Truckee, before, let's go back to when Truckee was born as a railroad town servicing the burgeoning gold and silver mines in the community. I'm sure you went up and down what was now Donner Pass Road, Brickletown. And back in the day, you had the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, and they're all out there just doing their thing. So what we're trying to achieve is finding a missing definition. My point was that I don't think that we want to say only one guy can be in there. He can't have a bookkeeper. He can't have somebody helping him lift some things, So that's where I'd like to start our discussion.
I have a question. Why would and I just didn't get this out of the last time we discussed this. Why would the particular Mr. Morris's business not fit under the accessory use or the home occ definition?
Well, the home occ would work if it was in a single family, but it's not. I did talk with him about the accessory use option, so that would be an option that would be allowed at the staff level if he could meet the floor space, how it would be laid out.
Production, by the way, rather than manufacturing.
So the square footage ratios don't work for that particular business. You take...
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say he could also do live work if he wanted to live there. So that's another option that would increase the floor area.
Yeah, that doesn't work for Mr. Morris from the discussions that we've had. He already owns a house in Truckee and is raising his family there. The McCarthy building that Ms. McCarthy bought 16 some odd years ago and has been operating her business out of, which is very similar, to my understanding, has 4 retail street front facing units that vary in size from 155, thank you, units that are, varying from 250 square feet to 500 square feet thereabouts. and then there's 1,000 square foot
She said
thereabouts.
offices. She said retail and she said offices in the same sentence, so I don't really know whether they're retail or offices. And
So
those
if
are
you take a
different
look at the
things.
building, if you take a look at the building, it is on Donner Pass Road. I have not been inside the building. I've driven past it numerous times. There are 5 street-facing. Thank you. Yeah, right. So I don't know what some of the uses that are in there now. I think there's a bike shop guy. I don't, it doesn't matter. They're small. They're small, 5 street-facing units, and then I believe the McCarthys live upstairs, and then there's an adjacent, approximately 1,000 square foot shop. And so this incredibly complex matrix that we have of this general plan does not, what they're trying to do, it just doesn't work. So we're trying to add an additional use, a missing definition, that services the community and is not by any means unrealistic, in my opinion.
I understand the purpose of what you're suggesting, or I think I understand. I mean, let me go back to something you said before. Back in the gold and silver mining days or the timber mining days, that's pre-zoning. We have zoning for a reason, because you really don't want a tannery next door to your house. Okay? You don't probably want a gold stamp mill next to your house. There's reasons, that's why we have zoning. And you don't want a 5,000 square foot concrete tilt-up next to your house either. So, we have to be careful about what we can allow so that we have a nice result. Now, I don't know that, I think there might be a place for artisanal production in permitted uses. It really seems like jumping through a whole lot of hoops, going through a whole lot of trouble, if you will, to add this, if we had to, revise the general plan and do a public process on it. So that's why I'm asking about other ways to approve this particular project. It seems like that's a pretty big thing to do. And do we need to do it, I guess, is the question.
Well,
I'm not
do we
sure
need
staff
to go
feels
through-
like, do we need to do it?
Also, do we need to go through the general plan? That's just staff's opinion. No offense, but.
How would you add this to the code?
Well, we're only talking about CMU and NMU. And we're just using McCarthy as an example. I want to be perfectly clear. I don't care if they do. Well, I do care because in my world, the old is selling to the new. And that's what we're supposed to be, in my opinion, that's what we should be promoting. And that's how these buildings get cleaned up and nicer.
He's not calling you that. Okay, just to be clear.
She knows who I am. So we're talking about 2 corridors mostly on Donna Pass Road, on the main roads already. So we're talking about residential units that are already on a main street, that are already surrounded by other commercial uses at this point. So keep that in mind too. So all that buffering was way overkill in my opinion. And I also want to say I appreciate staff's time and effort into the research that they had done. I really do. It does feel like the research was done just to bolster your opinions or what you were saying before. So instead of looking at other options, you were just looking for ways to justify what we were already told. That's the feeling I personally get.
I think we're just using our professional planning opinions. We did look, we're not trying, we're staff. This is what we went to school for. We're trying to give you our opinions. You're totally welcome not to, but I don't think we took it at that lens. Okay. Because, there are other options. So we kind of explored those. And even with artisanal manufacturing, you guys have the choice to bring this to council. And we gave you some of our considerations, but understanding that this is something you may want to forward. And, we, as staff, will do that for you.
And
Thank you.
Just to get back to your general plan comment before, what we're really trying to do is implement what the council put in place. And I know there's parts of that not everyone agrees with and doesn't like, but it is the document that was adopted. So we're looking at it through that lens of, is this consistent with what they adopted for this area of town? And they didn't talk about manufacturing uses, which is why we have concerns about the consistency.
Which is why I want to remove the word manufacturing, because it's not. He's an artist creating art. He's creating single-use pieces of furniture by himself. There's no machines. There's no Keebler elves there pounding it. It's not an assembly line. There's not one person putting a fender on and the next person putting a tire on. It's one person creating a work of art.
It's
So
almost like
this
an
isn't
art
manufacturing.
studio. Like,
And we think that there could be a way to make that consistent, but it needs to be consistent with the neighborhood serving commercial uses, which was the purpose of that zone district. So to have someone just producing items that are not adding to that.
I get it. Most of the neighborhood uses I heard in tonight's presentation were food. I pretty much heard food.
Well, there's retail, there's office uses that could support, there's service commercial uses, there's all kinds of uses that can support these neighborhoods that would reduce people's need to travel to other parts of town. So we're not saying that there's not a way to make it work, but we do think that we need to factor in the general plan consistency as sort of the baseline here.
Well, I like to represent the blue collar and the entrepreneurs in us all, or those of us that are in the private sector that want to take the risk and open up their own business, which I believe is 50% of American businesses, mom and pop. So if we make opening a business so strict that nobody's going to do it, we'll be a town with nothing.
I mean, we do have zone districts where these businesses there are spaces to rent. So I understand.
And I get that.
What you're saying.
Again, it's not that particular. It's just an example of.
I think that, so that's an interesting comment. We do have zone districts where there's spaces to rent. How come then they haven't been rented out? And then, I think we should have more flexibility to allow the market to decide what is going to work. If that particular building had a strong demand for all of these walkable businesses that we envision in that neighborhood, where is the line of applicants trying to buy that building? Where are the people saying, this is the spot where I have to have my neighborhood community thing that's going to get everybody out of cars? Everybody wants it. I can't give this, I can't get them here fast enough.
And I'm going to say again, there's not enough people in that NMU to justify most of what you're trying to do.
So it's not what we're trying to do, it's what the general plan laid out. So you're more than
And what's
welcome to
trying
make
to
a
be
recommendation to the council. If there's parts of it that you don't agree with that you think should potentially be changed, then you can absolutely make that recommendation to them.
If memory serves, we recommended that the general plan wasn't ratified because it wasn't done. I might be incorrect, but that's how I thought it went down. So I think we should make recommendations to council on what we think the way this should be.
I have a question. How does your definition of this new artisanal manufacturing land use compare to the handcraft industry's small scale manufacturing definition that already exists? And why can't we modify that somehow?
I was thinking the same thing, Sammy.
That's a great question. Let's take a closer look at it.
Could we possibly see that definition? Thank you. I salute this notion that we could, recognize artisanal production as a use that we value here in Truckee, because that's really consistent with what the spirit of our town is like, as is having places where people could live and work in the same area, because we all know people would love to live and work in Truckee. More people would love to live, work, and live. Not necessarily in the same building always, but certainly more people would want to work and live.
No, I guess I'm going to try to zoom in a little, but bear with me. We don't have the full Adobe on this.
Is handcrafted allowed in CMU and NMU?
So handcraft industries is a manufacturing use, so we didn't propose that. I think the definition that we think that this particular use fits best under is the furniture and fixtures manufacturing, because that specifically is for things like cabinet making. If there's an interest in modifying the handcraft industries definition to So basically what Handcraft Industries is, it's supposed to capture everything that's not already covered in a different category. So I think there would need to be some kind of tweaks made to that language because it is already covered in another category, but maybe it's a scale is what you're seeing as the difference between someone who's doing that at a larger scale versus someone who's doing it at a smaller scale.
There's a big difference between someone who's making kitchen cabinets and household cabinets for installation and someone who's making a single beautiful cabinet.
Yeah, so I don't think it fits under the existing definition, but it could be potentially modified.
I'd like that as long as we have adequate language to shape the scale, to suggest the scale of what would be permitted.
Yeah.
Because realistically, if someone's going to come and look at, oh, I want to have one of these incredible cabinets for my stereo, my hi-fi, and I'm going to come visit. And then I might go look at the bicycle shop next door and walk to the cafe and the bakery while I'm there. If there's some other things in that area, that's the beauty of neighborhood mixed use. It is indeed the type of place that would bring people to view it, I think.
That was
and
well
I
said.
think artisanal production is something that would bring people in, like our beloved community potter.
Yeah, I think that's why we were recommending that there be a required commercial component, just to have some consistency with the NMU zoning district for the reasons that you just articulated. And it sounds like there's interest in having that.
I think we're also trying to understand what the threshold is, because you could have someone who is a single, person who's doing one kitchen set at a time, right? They're doing cabinets for one kitchen at a time. I'm not sure we're clear what the difference is because they're making a single piece of furniture versus one set of cabinets that, maybe they're not even doing the whole kitchen. Maybe they're just doing like an add-on to an existing kitchen. And so I think that's where our struggle has been. It's not that we're not hearing the interest of the commission. It's that we have a wider lens sometimes. And so we've also kind of had the other side of it where the neighbors have complained because someone's been doing something out of their house or in a commercial area where it didn't quite fit one of these definitions. And so believe me, there's interest in supporting, artists in general. That's very much our culture here. And in fact, all the recent R2SC meetings about West River, the most recent one, they talked about creating what's called a creative district. So actually using the zoning for the purpose of incentivizing businesses like this to have a place to go where there's other similar businesses, so there's synergy there. So I think that's something that's very much on the community's mind. Riverside Drive was like that throughout its history. It's had so many different artisan uses in that area. But we've also had like the home butcher. That's part of our history too, which we had on East River Street. And I've actually seen that underneath someone's deck as part of what the house was built for, on purpose. And so we are sensitive to kind of understanding that how we structure this helps us help people when they come in and say, I want to operate this type of business. Like we want to make sure that we're not creating those conflicts with their neighbors, that they do fit in that area. So I think that's just for us understanding what the threshold is. Is it one piece of furniture at a time? Does that have a definition to it? Is a whole kitchen okay? Like those are the types of things that we just have to get into because we're the ones helping people when they come in and ask to open a business.
And I think the amount of employees would really help, in my mind, define that, right? So if you have a factory making kitchen cabinets, you're probably going to have more than one person. So even if we were talking about kitchen cabinets, which is a great example, and it was one person at a time handcrafting cabinets, I don't see that as manufacturing. I just don't. I see assembly lines as manufacturing, or at least 3 people, 4 people putting something together.
The square footage may be, and I know that staff noted that 5,000 might be a little large.
Yeah.
And the difference between, so I've been in an individual artisanal wood shop many times, and I've been in cabinet manufacturers, and there's a big difference in size in those. And so the square footage may be the way to control that, rather than writing 10 pages of definitions for what constitutes artisanal versus something else. Maybe it's the square footage that helps determine that. And that does matter. It does matter what you're making, how much square footage you need. A jewelry bench doesn't take much room, a miniature forge, but A wood shop takes more room.
I think that's a great suggestion.
In our staff recommendation, if you did want to move forward, one of our, ideas was making it smaller, but also so it could be looked at as consistent with the general plan is having maybe a requirement, a floor area requirement to be retail space along with the artisan manufacturing. That could be a pathway to not say this is kind of larger accessory than our 25%, but not completely inconsistent with this notion of neighborhood serving commercial. So that was one of our suggestions if you were interested in that. And I will say with our home ox, we do have, to do it at the staff level, I think it's 1 or 2 employees off the top of my head. If you needed to have more, we have like landscaping businesses. Maybe they have 1 truck and an employee comes every day and they run it out of their house. There's a higher level of review. It's a minor use permit, but you could still have a more intensive home oc. So we do use square footage and employees already as ways to look at how intensive a use that's not usually allowed is.
What's the vision for how formal the retail portion of this would have to be? Like, is there hours on the door, or you just have to be able to accommodate the occasional person who stops by and wants to see what you do?
So it's usually floor area that's designated as that, even if it's within the same space. It can be designated on the floor plan as that's the retail area. We have had cases where it's the retail component is based on hours, but that's a little more difficult. I think the easier way is to just designate some space on the floor plan.
We really don't
an
want
idea of modifying the existing definition because it gets it there sooner and with less complication. But
However, if it has to go through a general plan amendment, we're wasting our time.
that's why I'm suggesting we just modify the definition for one of the uses that's already in this table.
And if you were to require a retail component, whatever size that is, then that could provide a path, like Chantal said, where we would be able to say it's not inconsistent with the general plan, because it is still providing a neighborhood serving commercial use, even if it's smaller.
And from what we've seen, a lot of artists want to have some small retail space, whether they, operate it 1 day a week or 5, it's up to them. But it gives them a more formal location to show off what they have that isn't just their workspace. So I don't feel like that's inconsistent with how most people are operating their businesses.
And it provides them an opportunity to sell from that location, because retail's permitted, not only required but permitted, because some people might be looking at it from a different angle. Wait, you're telling me I can't sell something out of my space? So it doesn't have to be beautiful, it just has to be there. And then on the floor plan, that seems like a pretty key thing for applicants to keep in mind. Put it on the floor. But we could just edit this right here, handcraft industries, small scale manufacturing. This is an exhausted list. This is just providing examples. So we don't have to list everything that could be included there, but
Yeah,
we
you
could
would
put
probably
in
wanna
a retail component. We could add, sorry, what?
Yeah, I was going to say you could add some language, because right now it says not classified in another major manufacturing group. So I think you'd want to distinguish this somehow from those other manufacturing groups, whether it's the scale or the maximum size or something along those lines.
Okay, so just so I'm clear and following along here, now we're talking about proposing a change to definition handcraft industry so that it's consistent with the general plan, right? And includes that a certain area of retail use which we can specify.
Could we take handcraft industries and have two sub-levels, like small scale manufacturing, which would still be allowed where it's allowed, and then maybe like accessory or neighborhood artisanal, whatever, something that differentiates it but still falls under that definition. So that would work in these more residential mixed use areas.
Yeah, we could do that.
And you could just put a maximum square footage in there and a percentage of retail or a requirement for retail access. And then we would have to, do we have to still add it to table 210 then?
Yeah, we would need to add it to the table and then modify the definition or create some kind of tier within the.
But if our definition was consistent with the general plan, we would not have to do it.
Well, I'm just saying within this, we need to modify this definition.
Yeah.
And potentially have that more neighborhood serving type of artisan use.
And then we could bring that to council and explain why we feel that it wouldn't necessarily, violate the general plan land use designation because of the parts of the definition we've added, adding the retail, keeping it community serving.
And I think keeping it smaller also would address some of our concerns about the impacts.
Yeah, of course. We definitely have to consider that people are living here in this area.
So going back,
Could we see this before it goes to council?
We would have to bring it back to another hearing.
Should we be drafting it tonight? But I need to know how our authors of this are feeling about it.
no, I think I'm very appreciative of the approach that you're taking. I think we're on the right track. And my question would be to staff: what's on the January agenda? Because if we were to want to see this again, we would want to know if we could see it in January. Otherwise, if things get busy at the beginning of the year, it may just kick the can too far down the alley. I think that we could probably hash through this tonight and just come up with a definition.
I think we could draft something. I think we've got some writers over there that can get us started, and then we could probably pick at it enough to make it happen. Don't you guys think so?
Yeah, we can pull up a slide and we can maybe copy over this definition and look at how we potentially want to modify it.
I thought the two subcategories might be helpful.
Okay, so in a previous slide, we saw that recently there were some facilities that were approved in the 1,300 and 1,900 square foot range. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I actually looked at a few different projects, and the 1900 was the high end.
The 1900 was
kind
the
of
high end.
outlier. It was more like 1100, 1300 was more common.
What if we split the difference and said, just for the sake of trying to hash through this, 1,500 square feet for the production space? Does that seem reasonable for an artisan? Those of us that have built buildings, 1,500 square feet is pretty big. The average two-car garage these days is about 650 square feet.
And I guess I would be interested to take our exact test case that we have here. We have a sign shop that is not in compliance, and we have beautiful cabinet maker here, which I looked at your website, it's amazing, that wants to move in. These are both businesses that would probably exactly what we'd want to see in a neighborhood mixed use. Like if we took that example, that building specifically, and we have a potential new owner who's going to clean up an old building, what is existing there so that they find themselves in compliance when we're done?
Yes, Jeannie identified that it was just under 1,600 square feet for the workshop. So if a portion of that was required to be retail, then that would work with the 1,500. Like if you said 25%, retail component, which is kind of flipping the accessory use and going the other way.
Would we want it a little more to keep it?
We proposed 60%. We were just trying to come up with a number that would be obvious that it's still a commercial neighborhood serving commercial use. I'm not tied to 60%, but we are, like we said, we're trying to find dance the line between keeping it consistent with the general plan and still allowing it.
I feel like we run the risk of being in a situation where you're like, well, is that retail? Is that manufacturing? When you physically go to inspect a space, who is going to draw the line to say, well, this is front of house, this is back of house? Like, how do we leave as much open for the owner of the property or the user so that as long as they are providing some retail component, whether it's 100 square feet or whether it's 1,500 square feet of their total space, as the businesses may flex a little bit and grow and shrink, again, like how much do we want to have to micromanage? Oh, he's got an extra 50 square feet of manufacturing and therefore now he's not in compliance and he's got to play some game trying to get back in compliance.
Does it have to be in the same unit?
Like, do we even put any percentage on there? How about just, and will include some portion that is retail?
I think we fear them.
Show on the plan.
We're not, then we're not showing a neighborhood serving commercial use, which is what the general plan says is supposed to go there. So we're trying to find a way that we can add an artisan manufacturing use without, it violates the wrong word, but I'm going to use again, without, getting ourselves into trouble where we have an inconsistent general plan and zoning district. And when that happens, the general plan supersedes. So we're, in trouble. And if there are impacts, it just kind of rolls down the hill, right? If a neighbor does complain, then we have something that's not consistent. And
I think if you also want us to flesh this out a little bit more, we probably need more time than trying to do it here. maybe an option you could consider is picking 2 commissioners to work with staff so that we could put it on for council to consider in January if that's a timing issue for you. Otherwise, bringing it back would allow us to kind of think through some of this, of what a better definition would be that kind of addresses what we've heard tonight.
What's January looking like?
I think we only have one project.
For planning commission or council?
Planning Commission.
It is the development permit request for Kids Zone Museum.
So
And then the council meeting that this would be potentially slated for would be the week prior to your meeting.
Right.
let's say we were willing to approve all of the rest of these changes in the development code. Could we do those and just leave this one definition out so that the rest of the code can move forward? You guys can move forward with getting the rest of this approved, and then we just leave this one little H dot?
You could.
Yep. Yeah, I guess you could have us included in the next round that we're going to be bringing to you in a couple of months when we start the next round.
I have a feeling there's some people that might like to have that happen sooner.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess if we can put some parameters around what we'd like to see in the definition, does it really need to come back to us? Or do we have faith that they'll, work with our intentions to take it to council in a way that we would like?
I like the 2 commission idea, and I'm thinking Coral and Dave.
I'm willing to do that.
That's a good idea.
I'm willing to do that too, provided that we can have this back in front of us in January. And so if we get this back in January, we come up, we workshop this definition, we get this back in January, the commission then forwards the recommendation to council. When does will they look at that then in February?
Yeah, that would be the first meeting we'd be able to get it on, would be in February.
Probably the second meeting too.
What are the chances? What are the chances we could take a stab at doing a 15-minute recess and staff, you take a look at, what could we try to get through our way this evening, so that we could have this be done sooner than February.
Before we waste a whole lot of time on one issue, do we have a lot of other questions and discussion on other parts of tonight's agenda? Folks, Dan, Coral, Sammy, Dave?
I have a request regarding something in the development code. Just something you mentioned we were talking about earlier, and that is that you're looking at what was it called, rooming and boarding houses. I would just request acceleration of looking at that. That's just a note.
I mean, I think the only other discussion question for us tonight was the, I guess, what was it, retail requirements?
Requirement, yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to, I
So if we
have
wanted to talk
opinions
about
on that too.
My
yeah.
question was, if we have 2 commissioners work with staff on this definition, would it have to come back to us, or could it go to council as part of this
That's what I was
set of
thinking.
amendments?
My idea was that you could just have it go to council, so
Right.
not to come back to commission, because you're trusting your 2 representatives.
Got it.
And then
Right.
Okay.
Then
I
it
would
could
be
go to
fine
the
with
council meeting the week before January.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be good.
So the week before in January. So it would be the second Tuesday in January. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so
Hope it's not a powder
I'm
day.
gone quite a bit the first week in January, but I'm sure we could find some time to.
So then this particular code.
I think
we're
we
gonna-
would be at we potentially would be at the second council meeting in January with the noticing and the requirements and the new
And the
staff.
holidays.
And the
Yeah.
holidays.
The staff report for the council meeting on the 14th would be due January 7th, which means we need everything dialed
okay.
in and in place over the holidays, which I don't see happening.
So
But we could shoot for the second council meeting in January.
let's go with the 2 commissioner concept for this particular issue. Right now, reserve the right to change that decision before the end of the meeting, but for right now, let's leave it at that and see how much longer we go with other issues. Does that work for everybody?
Yes.
Thank you.
I also would echo Coral's sentiment that I think I would be in favor of having council address the dormitory housing concept.
No, I'm just hoping. My suggestion was, in case I wasn't clear, is that I heard from the staff that they had started looking more closely at this for something that we can be trying to incorporate into permitted uses and land uses, I'm just asking that that gets sped up, because we have an employee housing need, and dormitory style and boarding house type places could be one wedge in the solution to that.
And I'm supportive of your intention of speeding that up, is my point.
All right, so what's our next issue? Dan, you want to go for something?
Yep, we got a couple items here. So I guess I'm a little bit hung up on these percentages, a half and a third of the projects in CMU and NMU commercial. And I'm just afraid we find ourselves in a situation where project is forced to have a certain amount of commercial. We want to have commercial, but then it's not all retail, it's not all storefront. And now you force office, basically, can't do whatever else there, and now it's vacant. You have a development that doesn't work for a developer.
So it was.
And we don't see it happen, or we miss out on the opportunity to get the housing portion of it because it's too much commercial in a project. Wondering, where do those numbers come from?
I'm wondering, make sure I understand what you're saying. It forces office?
It forces.
How does it force office?
It doesn't force office, but it forces not residential.
I can tell you why we went this way, and of course, we're just trying to do our best to implement the general plan, right? So, corridor mixed use, that was general commercial, right? So fully commercial, lots of commercial uses already exist there. The idea is to add more housing, so we have a lesser amount of commercial required because there's already commercial there. We're trying to be more flexible for the residential portion. Whereas for neighborhood mixed use, that's neighborhood commercial. Those were supposed to be centers to provide, good services to residents there. So it seems more important to keep a commercial aspect there. There's a whole residential neighborhood right next to it, and it still allows some residential uses. So that's kind of where we came up with the distinction, and that combined with what the state looks at, what a housing development is. These are commercial zone districts. They always were, and so we're trying to keep them still with that spirit of commercial and not just pure residential housing. So
it was 1/3 for CMU and a half for NMU?
correct.
And I just basically look at the artist lofts, and even now, the tenant who's moving in there is a nonprofit. It's not even like a.
Ooh, they're not moving in yet.
Yeah, and so it's not even, I don't want to say a real business, but they're not a self-sustaining, entrepreneurial venture or a small business like Mr. Morris's or whatever. And I just wonder, are we putting a constraint in place that we're going to regret down the line? And are we going to miss out on a housing project because there's too much of a requirement in commercial, and in an economy when commercial is being hammered, is this the right thing?
So what do you suggest?
I just wonder if the numbers should be lower. And I kind of, I was looking at some of the specific parcels. Like if we pulled up the neighborhood mixed use map real quick, you look at the far west side of that map, and there's that parcel on Donner Lake. And I was trying to pick apart a couple parcels that I thought would not work with this zoning.
What are your suggestions?
Well, so look at the far left parcel on the west parcel on the west circle there.
The west parcel on the west circle, the tiny little sliver at the end.
And so
The bigger one or the smallest? There's a teeny weeny one.
The bigger one. So that is a parcel that, as far as I know, was once slated for like a condo development, like 20 or 30 condos or something. It's been sitting vacant.
Is that the one with the little A-frame on it?
I don't know if there's anything.
No.
But when I look at a project like that, how big is that parcel? I could tell you.
Well, but if it's slated for residential now and it's not being developed,
It's actually commercial it's neighborhood commercial.
Neighborhood commercial.
Yeah.
It's zoned neighborhood commercial now?
I believe so. Oh, general commercial.
So that's right there across the street.
No, you gotta zoom out. Very heavy west end.
West of the mobiles.
Yeah, I see it. All right, it's a tiny little sliver.
Yeah, it's a vacant parcel, and it's a big parcel, which means you'd have to put a
Not a big
lot of
parcel,
commercial there.
It's 10,000 square feet.
All right, so let's zero in. What's the number that you're looking at? Let's discuss an actual percentage, 20%, 25%, 15%?
I mean, I'm actually going to look to staff because you guys did a lot more research on this, and I'm just curious, like, how do we get to that number? What do other jurisdictions use? Is that number too high? I don't think it's a bad number, but I just am concerned we're going to find certain properties that become undeveloped.
I mean, the research I think that Laura presented is that other jurisdictions have 80% commercial requirements or 10%, or, they're kind of all over the place. So I think what we're trying to do is look at, of course, the general plan intent again, what was there before. So this was a fully commercial property. So we want residential to come in, but not completely, not be mixed use. And as far as zoning goes and the general plan implementation, this number seemed to make sense to us, but we, understand that, we're not taking it from a developer's lens. We're taking it from a zoning and planning lens.
And there are uses like work-live that would meet that requirement. So I think, it really depends on the individual project. So I understand the concern that by making these standards, it makes it potentially difficult for someone to develop them. But we also don't know what every type of project someone's going to contemplate. So the code sort of sets a standard, and then it also has options for exceptions within it too, for things like planned development, where maybe you can't meet all of the standards, but you can show that you're meeting some of the standards, and there's a different process for it. Or frankly, if it's a housing project and they come in with a density bonus, they can ask for concessions and waivers, or things like standards for square footage. So there are other options out there.
Yeah, I mean, that lot is 2.2 acres. The one we're just talking about.
It's
No, the big one.
It is 2.2 acres. It also has a lot of slope to it too. So in a future proposal, that would be taken into consideration. So we can't necessarily think of every scenario.
It has a lot of rocks
with
too.
this.
The rocks you can move.
Well, with dynamite, yeah.
You can get rid of rocks. Yeah. And even slopes. I mean, again, if it's over 30%, then you can't develop on it. Fine. I just see a scenario where someone's got to put in 20,000 square feet of commercial at the end of Donner Lake, and that's never going to happen.
So
and now, what someone could do a condo development and put in a coffee shop, and maybe that does work.
Or as part of a future review of that site, those 30% slopes get removed as part of the calculation because it's not developable. So those are the things that happen at a very parcel specific level that aren't addressed with the standards that we create in development code.
So if you wanted just a number, Rich, I would say let's just lower them. Like, let's call it, instead of 1/3 and a half, how about 1/3 and a quarter, or 1/4 and a third? Because I just think it's going to make it easier for someone to come in and say, okay, how do I now do a mixed use development? I put less commercial in here. We know the housing pencils in our community. It creates jobs. It brings money to the community, all the stuff. The commercial is a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And we know when we build housing, you're going to have to build affordable housing.
Mm-hmm.
But if you want to put in 10,000 square feet of commercial, like this lot here, it's a 96,000 square foot lot. Even if they're only going to develop a third or a quarter of that, that's 25,000 square feet of construction. And now they're talking about 15,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet of commercial. That's a lot of commercial. Good luck filling that on the west of that lake.
I agree. I think it's too high. So
there's something like it's. I don't think. We
give
want
me
to
some
zero.
numbers to discuss.
So that's it. So let's go from 1/3 to a quarter and from 1/2 to 1/3. So that's a reduction.
I'm writing it down. So CMU would be a quarter.
25%.
Okay.
Just trying to drop it a little bit. I mean, we could go even further and say 10%, 20%.
NMU. I'm sorry. What was the other?
NMU would go to 1/3.
Okay.
Another consideration is in the future, we'll be bringing back the town density bonus program, which we can use this as an incentive where if you think that a reduced percentage for commercial is beneficial to a developer, we could say those types of projects that provide a housing type AMI that we're seeking as a community, that we can then reduce it automatically as part of that program. I mean, that's not going to happen today, but it's something that will happen in the coming months.
I did have a question for staff on that 2A. It says properties located directly adjacent to Donner Lake. Is that a lakefront that we're talking about?
All right. So there's a concept on the table.
No, I'm supportive. I'm supportive of that. I agree that we could, if we make the commercial requirement smaller, the likelihood of actually getting more residential units built is higher.
And I think quality commercial that actually can survive, not one fail.
Sammy, any?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want us to lose sight of the intent of this is to create that mixed use space, but I think that is a valid point that we do want things that actually fit the scale of the neighborhood. And maybe this is a better reflection of that. But I wouldn't want to go any smaller for the commercial component in either.
Coral?
Smaller than those percentages that were just proposed as amended.
Yes.
Okay.
Coral.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective as to how a project proponent would look at that, and we certainly don't want to discourage that. So I don't know what if these numbers feel right, then I'm okay. As long as we maintain the mixed use.
And they're minimums, right? So if somebody wanted to do
Right.
50% in MU, they could do it. So we're good with this? Are we good, staff? Can we move on to the next? What else you got, Dan?
That's it for now.
Sammy, go to the other side of the dais.
I think that's mostly what I had. Were there other discussion topics that you wanted us to focus on tonight? Staff?
Those were our only topics. Coral did have one
Right.
item that I think she wanted to bring up.
Coral's next on my list here.
Yeah, and I think this is covered, but I just kind of want to make sure that when I'm looking at the allowed uses for CMU and NMU, I asked, business support services are not allowed in the NMU. And when I looked at the definition, business support services include major things like equipment rental and equipment repair and vehicle servicing and things like that. But I wanted to make sure there was permission in the NMU to include like the office boss model of a commercial establishment. And if that's already covered in here, and a co-working space, these are things that bring people and activate a space. If I had a notary in my local neighborhood commercial area near Z Market on the Hill, I could get my notary done there, or instead of having a mobile one or driving downtown. Or if I needed to, I don't need to fax anything, but
Come on.
it's like something you might do at a hotel business center. There are people that don't have that kind of equipment. Some people don't buy a printer, and once in a while you need to print something, and maybe as long as that's incorporated,
Is it
already? Because
Office
it's
Boss
empty here.
feels like retail
Is
to
it?
me.
It's retail, but it's also a shipping drop-off. It's a notary. It's a copy and print service.
So the reason it's not allowed in NMU is you're right, it does include some more intense uses, but potentially what we could do is some kind of either new definition or a tiered approach, like I think Chantal suggested earlier with the other definition, where it's the uses that are appropriate in a neighborhood would be allowed, and we add that to the use table. So we could look at that when we're looking at this other definition.
I think
Micro
that's great.
business center, light duty business support services. I couldn't come up with a word or a definition for you.
I feel like this definition is definitely kind of an older definition when we're thinking of like big blueprints and, toxic smells and, hazardous materials. And I think like notary would be office. But yeah, I think there are some we could kind of cherry pick out that would be appropriate.
You could call it office support services as opposed to everything.
I mean, that's an idea, sure.
Yeah, we can look at that. I'm sure we can figure out a way to make that work.
Awesome.
I'm okay with leaving that to you.
Dave? Nada?
I don't have anything to add.
Neither do I. Yeah.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
Nope. Dave wants to talk more.
No, because you make the motion, and then Mr. Claren, the chair, will probably say any further discussion. So.
Was the motion omitting the?
It's going to change. I have to edit this on the fly here. So I move that we adopt Resolution 2024-13, taking the following actions. Recommending approval to the Town Council of the following general plan implementation actions. 1, Development Code 2424, Development Code amendments for mixed-use zoning districts, by right housing and cleanup amendments. 2, zoning map amendments, and 3, general plan cleanup amendments. with the exception of an edit to the definition of,
Maybe including, let's see, for mixed-use zoning districts, maybe including an edit to the definition of handcraft industries, along with adding the new definition to the land use table, so. including
allowed uses for
Edits to the.
neighborhood mixed use and corridor mixed use,
And office.
along with
support
adding
services.
a permitted use that is office support services. And 2, recommending the amendments to be exempt from CEQA pursuant to section 15061B3 of the CEQA guidelines and sections 15060C2 and 15060C3 of Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations.
What was the, okay. Including edits to the definition of handcraft industries and adding this use to the land use tables for MU and edits to the, or a new definition.
Yeah, it would be adding
And-
office support services.
Adding office support services. Are we only adding that to NMU? Is it already allowed in CMU?
I assume it is since Office Boss is there already.
Oh, true.
Well, they could be working illegally, just like
No,
McCarthy
because it was only, it was already.
It's permitted in CMU.
It is already permitted. Business support services are already permitted in CMU, but not NMU. So the office support services for NMU.
Was that the full motion?
Yes, that's
Then
what I
I'll need a
said.
second, please. Awfully quiet up here.
Oh, we need to add in the change to the percentages that you're recommending.
Oh, right. Thank you.
Mixed-use zone district, including edits.
Do we need to add a numbered item to say that we're going to have 2 commissioners develop a, or is that, do we have to clarify?
Well, that's what I was going to address in the any further discussion. I feel like we do want to. Well, how do we address
Yeah, that
that?
works.
So we've decided that Coral and I have a little pet project here that is to be done at when? When do we need that?
Probably early in the month.
Let's define early in the month a little bit more clearly, like with
We'd
a
have to look at
definitive.
the noticing deadline and when
Okay,
the
let's
staff
take a look.
report would be due. The staff report would have to be published, I think it would be but we'd have to submit it the Monday, like the week before.
So I guess the question is 2 questions. The clarifying: do we need to define the fact that 2 commission members will be making suggested? No, I'm getting a shake in my head. Several staff members are shaking their head no. Okay, so we don't need to add that. Do we need to add any language that we will have this to you by a certain date?
So I think the staff report would have to be submitted on the 20th of January. So maybe we shoot for having it done by like the 10th. That would give us a week to
Okay.
incorporate it into the staff
Okay.
report.
All right. So the ask for Coral, you and I, is to have our recommended revised definition of the handcrafted, where is it? Handcraft industries language by January 10th. I know we can do it.
We can set up a meeting so that we can sit down together and kind of hash out what that should look like.
That sounds great.
I think it's certainly helpful to have staff's input on appropriate language for the code.
So do we need to have that specifically notated in this? Okay.
I feel comfortable, because this is a recommendation, so I feel comfortable with the language. We're calling it commissioner edits to the definition, so you're recommending those edits. We're not those aren't,
Yep.
set in steel or
Yeah.
set in stone. So
Got
I
it.
think
Would
Or
it be would it be unreasonable for us to take a look at our calendars right now, staff and Coral, to try and figure out, with all the busyness and hustle and bustle of holidays, when we can actually just figure out a time to be here and get this done?
It would probably be the first, like after.
Sure. Yeah.
That's
January
fine, that's
1st.
fine.
Okay.
But we do also need to add, we'll have to add a definition for office support services, the code.
I think
I don't need to be in, you guys are gonna
Yeah,
do that,
they're gonna
right?
handle
Yeah,
that.
Okay.
if we're going to meet, we could have, we could pull out some of those definitions and discuss if that kind of fits what Commissioner Kavanaugh was thinking.
Okay. I'm ready to look at my calendar.
I have some constraints, so.
I'm sure we all do. And so I believe we're looking at, really, it would be the week of,
The 6th through the 10th that week.
the 6th through the 10th. Okay, that gives us enough time, so maybe earlier in that week?
Can't do earlier in that week. Later
Okay.
in that week would be better.
O-
And I know
okay.
we're up against the 10th, but I think one meeting, we're gonna accomplish.
Well,
some
I think
short
we could all
meetings.
come to the meeting with what we we have in mind.
Ideas, yes.
Yeah, and then you and I can also
We
bounce
could-
some of
we
those
could-
back
we could
via
have- yeah, we could talk.
electronic mail prior to that. So Thursday the 9th, look good for everybody?
I could do early in the day on the 9th.
How do you define early in the day?
Like say before 1:30.
Okay, 10 a.m. Thursday the 9th work for everybody?
Works for me.
Yes.
Okay, Laura, can you send out a calendar invite to everybody?
Yes.
Can you send that to my personal email, not my town email, please?
Okay.
Thank you.
So I now have mail on my.
Okay, and then my only other question on this amended language for this motion, do we need to add anything in there that two commission members are wanting to let council know that we want to have a definition for dormitory housing sooner than later?
I think we can add that. And
Or it's possibly an amendment or a change to, sorry, I don't use the word amendment, and add it to the definition for rooming and boarding houses, if that might be a more efficient way to get to it.
So
Either add a
Yeah.
definition for dormitory housing, a use, or edit dorm, or rooming and boarding houses.
Yeah, so what's
Maybe
the...
it's called a permitted use that incorporates the concept of dormitory housing.
Well, so the existing language now is room and board housing?
rooming and boarding house, and it's allowed in residential zones. So the particular applicant that I've been working with wants to allow it in a commercial zone. So that's one change that would need to be made. We also don't have any development standards for it. So that's another thing we've been working through, what it would look like. Because you can't really just apply all of our multifamily standards to that type of use. It
No, I
doesn't
understand.
really
Yeah,
work.
it's a
So-
clearly it's an individual use.
Yeah, so that's the kind of stuff we've been talking through.
So recommending town council direct staff to work on revising the definition of room and boarding to include dormitory. Is that?
I think we'd want a new one because the room and boarding definition says in a dwelling. So
Well, that's why we'd be updating the definition.
Oh, we
So
would
this is all
open it?
stuff we're working through, and we don't have the answers yet, so, but it is something that we're actively working on. So maybe your recommendation could be more general, just to
Yeah,
have us
recommend,
included in a future code update sooner.
Recommend
recommendation.
prioritizing in a future code update the revision of the room and board housing to include dormitory style. Blah
Yeah,
blah blah.
I think that works.
I don't think we have a dormitory, right? I mean, so it's like, and maybe, dormitory, like in parentheses or in quotes, is kind of just a generalized term.
Yeah, I think adding the quotes is a good idea there.
Like, what does that look like? What is a dormitory?
We can work on a more modern term for that. Because there's right for now, dormitory.
Yeah,
Pods.
sure. We can
The rooming and boarding house is something that a lot of jurisdictions have based on the research I've done so far. So it's not uncommon.
I mean, I think it's worth a deeper conversation because I think it solves a lot of problems that are created by some of our regional employers that use seasonal workers that then end up taking other units offline that could be that would service other community members more suitably.
Coral, are you happy with the motion in front of you? Since you made it.
Just don't tell me I have to read it again.
Yes, you do. And you did.
Change the required commercial use component to 20 and 33%. Or if you're going to, make it 1/4 and 1/3 or 25% and 33%, please.
No
For
problem.
my little consistent heart.
You guys, this was the language that you guys were using.
I gave it that. I gave that.
I was like
that was me.
33.3333333. Okay, let's do 1/4.
Yeah, 1/4, 1/3.
I think this works.
Dave, since you negotiated it, could you second, please?
I'd be happy to second this motion.
All right. The only discussion I wanted to say is I wanted to thank Sammy for coming up with the handcrafted analogy because I think that really helped push this through. So thank you.
You're very welcome, and I'm excited that we were all able to agree on this approach.
It was nice.
Good teamwork, gang.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Kaylee.
Chair Claren?
Yes.
Vice Chair Gove?
Yes.
Commissioner Freeman?
Yes.
Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Yes.
Commissioner Taylor?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0. Number 8 on the agenda, staff reports with a question mark. So staff reports?
Yes, I have one. It really just a duplication of what I said earlier. We will have a January commission meeting. We've got a request for a development permit for the Kids Zone Museum. That'll probably be the only item that we have on that evening, given the scale of the project and some CEQA stuff.
Thank you. Number 9, informational items or informational items?
I don't think there are any.
Okay. Commission member reports?
I think the holiday lights look especially beautiful this year.
Do you notice they put little snowflakes on the lampposts? That was really cool. So this meeting is adjourned to the next meeting of the Planning Commission, January 21st, 2025, 5 p.m. right here on Truckee Airport Road. Thank you very much.